Ogidi realized too late that he had underestimated her. In a moment of desperation, he reached out to shove her aside. But Adama was prepared. She had anticipated this reaction, and before he could react, she brandished a knife, a fierce determination in her eyes. A struggle ensued, and for the first time in his life, Ogidi felt true fear. He realized that this time, Adama was no longer the silent, forgiving wife he had once known. In the heat of their struggle, Adama's pent-up fury erupted, and in one swift, decisive move, she struck. Ogidi let out a blood-curdling scream, collapsing onto the ground, clutching the source of his pride and his downfall. Adama stood over him, her face blank, as she took away what she had cut from him and walked into the kitchen. Without a word, she began to prepare a pepper soup, her movements calm and precise, as though she were preparing an ordinary meal. Ogidi's charm was like a sweet poison in the quiet village of Unsu. He had a way with words that left the young maidens blushing and the elders shaking their heads in disapproval. Although married to the gentle and loyal Nnenna, Ogidi refused to abandon his wandering ways. His grin would widen whenever a new woman crossed his path, and the tales of his infidelity spread through the village like wildfire. To him, the vows of marriage meant little more than empty words spoken on a whim. Nnenna, on the other hand, held onto the hope that one day he would change. But as the years went by, Ogidi's charm only grew bolder. He would laugh in Nnenna's face whenever she tried to confront him, dismissing her fears as mere foolishness. His late nights and suspicious disappearance became too obvious to ignore. And yet, Nnenna kept her silence, bearing her shame alone. The villagers watched in pity as Ogidi made a spectacle of himself, flirting openly with women young and old. Nnenna's patience was beginning to wear thin, and deep down, she knew she was close to her breaking point. One evening, Ogidi's charm landed him in trouble when he was caught red-handed by one of Nnenna's friends, Chinwe. Ogidi was whispering sweet words to the butcher's daughter under a dim light of the palm trees, his hand resting comfortably around her waist. Chinwe happened to pass by, and recognizing Ogidi, felt a surge of anger and disbelief. Without hesitation, she stormed up to them, demanding an explanation. Ogidi, caught off guard, stormed over his words, but the little girl beside him was quick to flee, leaving Ogidi humiliated and alone. Chinwe wasted no time in reporting what she had seen to Nnenna, who sat quietly, her face betraying no emotion. But inside, her heart twisted in pain and disappointment. Nnenna had endured so much already, hoping against hope that Ogidi might realize the hurt he was causing her. But that night, as she lay in bed, she knew the time had come to make a decision about her future. She was no longer sure how much more humiliation she could endure. Despite the confrontation, Ogidi continued his humanizing ways, unable or unwilling to change. He felt invincible, even as whispers and judgmental stares followed him around the village. To him, Nnenna's meekness was a blessing, as it allowed him to behave as he pleased without consequences. Ogidi often joked with his friends about how he would get away with anything. However, even he failed to notice the silent storm brewing within his wife, whose patience was reaching its limits. One afternoon, Ogidi's infidelity became even more evident when he failed to come home for several days. Nnenna heard rumors from the villagers that he was seen in the next village, courting a young widow. The shame of it all made her blood boil, but instead of confronting him when he eventually returned, Nnenna remained quiet, her eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and determination. She started to see Ogidi not as her husband, but as a stranger, a man she no longer recognized. Just when Nnenna thought Ogidi could sink no lower, he brought a new woman, Adama, into their lives. Adama was young, beautiful, and had a fairy spirit that Ogidi found irresistible. He claimed that he was in love with her and boldly declared his intention to take her as a second wife. The news hit Nnenna like a slap in the face, but Ogidi showed no remorse. Instead, he taunted Nnenna, laughing at her weakness and telling her she had no choice but to accept it. The village was stunned, and people openly condemned Ogidi's actions, but he ignored their voices. Adamma too didn't seem to be concerned with the whispers and disapproving looks. She strutted around the village with Ogidi by her side, basking in their attention. And Nnenna was pushed out of her own home. With Adamma's arrival, Nnenna found herself stripped of everything she had worked for. And as she walked away, she felt a mixture of shame, anger, and relief. The gentle, patient Nnenna was gone. Adama wasted no time establishing her place in Ogidi's household, with decorating and imposing her rules in the home. Ogidi, intoxicated by her beauty and fairy personality, indulged her every whim, even though it cost him dearly. But even Adama's charms couldn't keep Ogidi's wandering eyes from straying. He continued to flirt with other women behind her back, thinking she would be just as forgiving as Nnenna had been. But Adama was nothing like Nnenna, and she made it clear from the start that she would not tolerate his behavior. One evening, she caught Ogidi speaking a little too fondly with a village girl and confronted him in front of everyone. Ogidi tried to laugh it off, but Adama's very words silenced him, and the villagers looked on in shock. The scene left Ogidi humiliated and bruised, a taste of his own medicine that he wasn't prepared for. Despite Adama's fierce warnings, Ogidi's behavior didn't change. He saw her threats as mere words, and he continued to flirt with village girls whenever he got the chance. The simmering tension between them grew as Adama's patience waned. She could feel the mockery of the villagers and the sneers of women who had also fallen for Ogidi's charms. Her pride was wounded and her resentment toward Ogidi deepened. One evening, Ogidi was seen sneaking into a neighboring hut, where a young widow named Ebili lived. Adama, who had been informed of his whereabouts, waited for him. When Ogidi finally stumbled back home in the early hours, he found Adama waiting, her eyes blazing with fury. They had a fierce argument that night, their voices echoing through the quiet village. This time, Adama's anger was not so easily calmed. With each public confrontation, the villagers had more to say. Gossip spread like wildfire, painting Ogidi and Adama as a thirsty couple doomed to clash. The villagers were captivated by the drama, some siding with Adama and others whispering that she had brought the chaos upon herself by marrying a man like Ogidi. People would shake their heads as Ogidi strode by, wondering how long he would keep up his reckless behavior before Adama's anger reached a breaking point. Ogidi shrugged off the rumors, dismissing them as the idle talks of jealous villagers. To him, Adama was only bluffing. He continued his exploits, laughing in the face of Adama's anger and dismissing her fury as empty threats. But the villagers sensed something dark brewing within her, an anger that would one day erupt and change everything. One day, Ogidi's arrogance got the best of him when he openly flirted with a market woman, holding her hand as they joked and laughed together. Adama, who had gone to the market for errands, stormed upon the scene and felt a rush of anger so fierce it blinded her. She stormed up to them, snatched Ogidi's hands away from the woman, and slapped him in public, leaving him red-faced and humiliated. The villagers watched in silence as Adama unleashed her wrath, calling him every name under the sun. Ogidi, shocked and embarrassed, tried to regain his composure, but the damage was done. Adama's fury was no longer a private matter. It had spilled out for all to see, and her threats had become very real. That day, Ogidi realized that Adama's patience was not as limitless as he had thought. Back at home, Ogidi tried to reassert his dominance, yelling at Adama for the public display. But Adama stood her ground, warning him that if he continued to disrespect her, there would be consequences. Her voice was icy, and the look in her eyes held a promise of something darker. Ogidi felt a flicker of fear, but quickly brushed it aside, convinced that she wouldn't dare act on her threats. Adama's words, however, lingered in his mind. He could no longer ignore the seriousness in her tone, and for a moment, he felt the weight of her anger bearing down on him. But Ogidi was too proud, too foolish to truly believe she would go through with anything drastic. Little did he know he was treading on dangerous ground, and his days of invisibility were numbered. After the public scene in the marketplace, Ogidi tried to lay low, but only for a short while. He was back to his usual ways within days. And it wasn't long before he charmed another young woman from a nearby village. Adama, aware of his ongoing behavior, kept her distance, a cold silence hanging between them. The villagers noticed how the once fiery Adama now kept her anger bottled up, and some even wondered if she had resigned to her fate. Adama's silence, however, was not a sign of acceptance. It was the stillness before an inevitable storm. She busied herself around the house, but every task she did seemed to carry an edge of anger. Every time she spotted Ogidi sneaking out or returning late, her heart grew colder. She stopped warning him, stopped confronting him, and instead focused her energy inward, plotting silently. She knew Ogidi would never change, and she was slowly reaching her breaking point. Ogidi, undeterred by Adama's silence, felt liberated in a twisted way. Her lack of arguments and accusations made him feel like he had won. Soon enough, he set his sights on a young woman named Chika, a widow known for her beauty and independence. Ogidi began visiting Chika's hut under the pretense of offering her help around her home. Before long, the village buzzed with rumors of Ogidi's visits, and Adama heard every word. At first, Adama brushed off the gossip, but as the stories grew, her patience wore thinner. The image of Ogidi laughing with Chika, treating her with the attention and charm he had once reserved for her, dug deep into her heart. She kept her anger hidden, but inside she was calculating. Her once forgiving spirit was now cold. The Ogidi's actions had turned her love into a slow burning fury. One afternoon, Adama went to fetch water from the village well and found Ogidi laughing with Chika. They stood close, their laughter and playful touches betraying a level of intimacy that shattered whatever was left of Adama's patience. She approached them without a word, and as Chika noticed her presence, she quickly excused herself and left. Ogidi tried to act unaffected, but Adama's silence and piercing stare unsettled him. For the first time, Ogidi felt a hint of unease. He tried to brush it off, mocking Adama's anger, but she didn't respond. Instead, she gave him a warning look that chilled him to the bone. This time, there were no words, no threats, just a heavy silence that seemed to weigh down on him. For once, Ogidi wondered if he had pushed her too far. The annual village festival was a time of celebration, but Ogidi saw it as an opportunity for new conquests. He spent the night dancing, drinking, laughing with young women who were drawn to his confident, carefree demeanor. Adama watched him from a distance, her face expressionless, but her eyes burning with resentment. Every laugh, every flirtatious touch drove her closer to her breaking point. By the end of the night, Ogidi was seen slipping away with a young maiden, disappearing into the darkness. Adama turned away from the scene. Her heart hardened. Her husband had not only humiliated her, but made a mockery of their marriage in front of the entire village. She knew then that she could no longer hold on to the hope that he might change. The final threads of patience within her snapped, replaced by a resolve that she hadn't felt before. Days passed and Ogidi continued his reckless behavior, completely oblivious to the storm growing in his home. Adama's silence deepened, but her presence seemed to carry a menacing air. Villagers noticed the change in her demeanor and the gossip spread. Some began to warn Ogidi, suggesting he show his wife more respect, but Ogidi only laughed, claiming he had her under control. Behind closed doors, Adama began to make preparations. She cooked his meals and kept the home as usual. But every action was laced with a quiet, chilling resolve. She no longer felt love or pity for him. Her heart was as cold as stone. Even as he continued his affairs, she waited, biding her time for the moment she would make him face the consequences of his actions. Ogidi's next affair was perhaps his boldest. This time, he openly courted a girl from the same village, a woman young enough to be his daughter. Her family, outraged, confronted Ogidi, demanding he end his affair and respect his marriage. Ogidi laughed in their faces, mocking their values and declaring that he was free to do as he pleased. The disrespect he showed only fueled the villagers' anger, and they turned their sympathy towards Adama. News of the incident reached Adama's ears, and this time, she did not flinch. She calmly continued her daily tasks, ignoring the sympathetic glances cast her way. But within her, the anger was simmering like a pot ready to boil over. Ogidi's blatant disrespect had finally stripped her of any lingering loyalty. Her mind was set and her plan was clear. One afternoon, Ogidi's luck almost ran out. He was caught sneaking out of Chika's hut by her elder brother, who was furious at the sight. A heated argument ensued, and Ogidi barely escaped a beating. The encounter left him shaking, but he quickly brushed it off, his pride refusing to acknowledge the growing consequences of his actions. He returned home at night, his arrogance intact, dismissing Adama's cold stare with a mocking grin. Adama, however, saw the fear in his eyes and knew he was starting to feel the weight of his actions. The incident only strengthened her resolve. She no longer saw him as her husband, but as a man who had shattered her life and left her with nothing but shame. She felt no sympathy for his close call, only a dark satisfaction in knowing that he was starting to face the consequences he so richly deserved. The village elders, aware of the unrest Ogidi's actions were causing, summoned him for a private discussion. They warned him to respect his wife and uphold the dignity of his home. Ogidi, however, laughed at their words, dismissing them as outdated and irrelevant. He boasted of his freedom to do as he pleased, even mocking the elders themselves for meddling in his affairs. When words of this meeting reached Adama, she felt a bitter satisfaction in knowing that the entire village was turning against Ogidi. His arrogance and disrespect had alienated him from everyone, and she no longer felt alone in her suffering. She understood that her husband had crossed lines from which he could never return. Her plan was nearing completion, and she prepared herself for the inevitable. Ogidi's most recent conquest was an insult Adama couldn't ignore, a young maiden whom he had openly brought to their matrimonial home while she was away. When Adama returned to find them together, she said nothing. Ogidi, drunk and emboldened, taunted her, daring her to react. But Adama's silence unnerved him. Her icy stare, hinting at something he couldn't quite understand. As Adama turned and looked away, Ogidi felt a flicker of doubt. This time, her silence was different, heavier. The villagers whispered among themselves, sensing that Adama's patience had reached its end. She was no longer a broken woman, but one hardened by betrayal, and the village could feel the tension building towards an inevitable conclusion. One evening, Ogidi drank heavily with his friends and boasted about his exploits, speaking openly of his power over women. He bragged about how no woman, including Adama, could tame him, and his friends laughed aloud, cheering him on. But as he spoke, a few villagers who overheard grew uncomfortable. His arrogance had crossed the line, and some began to wonder if he had cursed himself with his own words. When Ogidi returned home, he was too drunk to notice the cold expression on Adama's face as she watched him stumble through the door. He laughed, stumbling into bed, completely unaware that his boastful words had only deepened her resolve. To him, she was nothing more than a silent figure, a woman who had finally accepted her role. But to Adama, he was a man who was about to face his downfall. Days later, Ogidi invited Chika to his home, this time in broad daylight. Shattering any illusion of respect or discretion, he even asked Adama to prepare food for his guests, openly flaunting his disrespect. The sight of him laughing with Chika in her own home was a wound too deep to ignore. As she cooked for them, her hands trembling with anger, but she forced herself to keep her rage hidden. When they finished their meal and Ogidi sent Chika off with a flirtatious wave, Adama could take no more. She knew that there was no hope left for him to change, no reason to forgive. The years of humiliation and betrayal burned inside her, and she began to prepare in silence, mentally and physically, for what she would do. Her anger was a storm waiting to be unleashed. One stunning evening, Ogidi returned home to find Adama waiting for him. Her face was cold and her gaze piercing. As he stumbled inside, she blocked his way, confronting him with a calmness that chilled him to the core. Ogidi tried to laugh it off, but Adama was unmoved. She accused him, not with words of anger, but with a steady, measured voice that left him speechless. Ogidi realized too late that he had underestimated her. In a moment of desperation, he reached out to shove her aside. But Adama was prepared. She had anticipated this reaction, and before he could react, she brandished a knife, a fierce determination in her eyes. A struggle ensued, and for the first time in his life, Ogidi felt true fear. He realized that this time, Adama was no longer the silent, forgiving wife he had once known. In the heat of their struggle, Adama's spent-off fury erupted, and in one swift, decisive move, she struck. Ogidi let out a blood-curdling scream, collapsing onto the ground, clutching the source of his pride and his downfall. Adama stood over him, her face blank, as she took away what she had caught from him and walked into the kitchen. Without a word, she began to prepare a pepper soup, her movements calm and precise, as though she were preparing an ordinary meal. The villagers gathered outside, drawn by Ogidi's scream. They found him lying on the floor, bleeding and barely conscious. But Adama's face remained impassive. She served the pepper soup as Ogidi lay helpless, and a hush fell over the crowd as they realized the gravity of her actions. The air was thick with tension as the villagers whispered among themselves, wondering if Ogidi would survive or what fates awaited Adama for her revenge. As the nights drew on, the villagers left one by one, but the questions lingered in the air. Would Ogidi survive to tell his tale? Would the gods judge Adama's actions? The villagers would never forget these stormy nights, and the whispers of her vengeance would haunt them all. The end. Thank you guys for watching. Please like this video, drop a comment, and hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories like this.